What is up? It's The Rant. My name is Jeff Ratcliffe, and it is Thursday, August 26th. Just 2 days away from the biggest fantasy football draft day of the year. Man, I love that Saturday before Labor Day weekend. It is the best. There's nothing better than it. So we'll get you set up as we can today on the show. We got to talk about some quarterback news across the league. We're finally getting to the point where starters are named, with the exception of, well, one team in particular. So we'll talk about that, unpack that, tell you what it means for both one quarterback leagues and your two quarterback superflex leagues. And then also a request that I got on Twitter. Remember, you can always reach out to me there at Jeff Ratcliffe on Twitter. Somebody had asked me about the draft board. Of course, you can get the draft board, my personal draft board, what I use in my home league drafts, over at ftnfantasy.com. Use the promo code RATPACK to get yourself a discount. We have a cheat sheet page where everything's updated straight on through all the recent news. Sony Michel, Travis Etienne, the starting quarterback news that I'm about to get to, all of that. But I got a request of, basically how do you use this? And I think it's probably a broader question just in general, though, of how to draft. And so I'm going to do a couple minutes on how to draft. Obviously, that's something I could cover over several podcasts, but I think there's a couple key points that people generally miss when it comes to drafting their squad. So we'll talk about that on the podcast today as well. But let's dive into the news. So the big news yesterday, first and foremost, Teddy Bridgewater officially named the starter. I'm surprised by this, especially because in the morning we were hearing that they weren't close to a decision. But, Vic Fangio did it. He named him the starter, so there you go. What does this mean for Jerry Jeudy, for Cortland Sutton, for maybe Deep League's KJ Hamler, Noah Fant, who's a little dinged up? I don't think this is dramatic. I like the upside of Locke, but I like the stability of Teddy. So if anything, maybe your production is more stable here. You may not have as many splash plays. Teddy's not going to push the ball far downfield, anywhere near as far as Locke, but he'll be more productive, more efficient in the process. So that's probably just as good. I'm still very bullish on Jerry Jeudy. I've moved him up inside my top 24 wide receivers. I moved Cortland Sutton down just slightly. It's a little bit of a concern about the injury or the recovery, I should say, from last year's injury, but not a major concern. I'm still taking him as a wide receiver 3. Teddy is a low upside super flex 2 quarterback guy. Number three. You're not drafting him as your number 2. He should be drafted. He's not a priority. So that's kind of where we are with that. Just because he gets the job too doesn't mean he is going to keep said job. Urban Meyer also finally just stating the obvious that Trevor Lawrence will be the starting quarterback in week 1. I know there are some concerns out there. It was the preseason, so let's maybe just chill for a minute. I saw some folks are saying that he looked like Carson Wentz, which obviously is not a favorable comp right now. Let's just pump the brakes and maybe give Trevor Lawrence the benefit of the doubt. Never forget, Peyton Manning threw 28 interceptions in his rookie season, and that team went 1-15. Never forget that, because it's easy to forget after his amazing career. But never forget that. So let's give Trevor Lawrence the benefit of the doubt for right now. Kyle Shanahan will not be telling us who the starting quarterback is as of right now, but he said he has a pretty good idea. Jimmy Garoppolo also asked, and he said he has a pretty good idea. So internally, I'm sure it has already been essentially established. They're not going to tell us. But here's the one thing I have to say about Kyle Shanahan. We believed literally up until the draft that Kyle Shanahan was going to take Mac Jones, and he ended up going with the sexy option. Kyle Shanahan, and I should say John Lynch, etc., the team. They ended up going with the sexy option. So we're going to believe right up until they make the decision that they're going to start Jimmy Garoppolo. I think they're going to go with the sexy option. Trey Lance is a priority in this weekend's drafts. 1 quarterback, 2 quarterback, I don't care. Go out and get him. Go out and get him. New England, the last on the list here. Well, this was, timing's everything in life. And, of course, Cam Newton was unable to practice due to whatever happened with the COVID test, etc., which was a whole snafu right there. He will be back on the field today, Thursday, But in the meantime, move your meat, lose your seat. Little Lou Gehrig action here. Mac Jones showed up. Mac Jones balled out. He completed 21 of 23 passes, eventually had a streak of 18 straight completions, and then a tipped pass led to an incompletion. He even, and this was from Mike Reese, got a low 5 from Bill Belichick. And I was thinking about that. Like, what's the equivalent for one of the more excited head coaches out there, like a Sean McVay? That's like the equivalent of Sean McVay just streaking the field butt naked with a Belichick low 5. So, yikes. Tom Curran over at NBC Sports Boston thinks that Mac Jones has earned the starting job. Now, he is a beat writer. He's not a coach. But Curran said there's no on-field reason for Cam Newton to ever take a meaningful regular snap for the Patriots while Mac Jones is upright and able. Tell us how you really feel, Tom. Wow. So we may have to be talking about Mac Jones. Certainly a guy who now you could prioritize him, over Cam Newton in Superflex drafts this weekend as a third quarterback option. And by the way, if Mac Jones is the starter, your Damian Harris shares just look even better because there's less cannibalization in terms of the carries in that offense. So that happened pretty quickly, but, hey, they took him 15th overall for a reason. He was in the conversation for that number 3 pick for a reason. Mac Jones, very skilled, and this could be very interesting for the New England Patriots indeed. So let's do this then. Let's take a break, but after the break, I want to talk about sort of a quick how to draft, and in particular, I want to talk about how to use my draft board, which you can get over at ftnfantasy.com, like I just said. But one sheet, keep it simple. How do we use it? How do we dominate drafts? Well, that's all coming up right after the break. So one of the biggest issues I see with drafters, other than not being prepared, and seriously, just even if it's taking an hour or so, like cramming for the exam, at least try to cram. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably don't need to do that. But I know that some people just show up and they just blindly draft based off of whatever sheet they printed out. That's not going to work. At least know the sheet a little bit. At least know the places that you want to attack a little bit before the draft, if not be super prepared, which obviously is a much better approach. That's studying, not cramming, like literally knowing this stuff inside and out, not just kind of jamming it into your head before the draft. But regardless, other than that, the other thing that I see people do in fantasy drafts, which is a really big mistake, is being too literal with your rankings, your draft board, your tiers, whatever it is. So here's what I mean by that. If you're looking at a set of rankings, now the set of rankings is produced based on projections, very likely. I run projections, so projections for me is a simulation of the season 10,000 times. And the projections are averages. They don't show you ceiling and floor. They don't show you range of outcomes, none of that. They just show you the averages. I then take that based on my knowledge of the teams, my knowledge of the upside of the player or lack thereof, my own subjectivity about who I think personally might break out, and I move players around. I don't have dramatic movements from projections. Projections are like 80% of what the rankings are, if not even more than that. That's just a rough approximation. Then I build those into tiers. I build those tiers because guys can be ranked back-to-back who are, very different types of players. You can look at somebody like Cooper Kupp and Jerry Jeudy, who I mentioned earlier. They're back-to-back in my rankings. I, in fact, have Cooper Kupp ahead of Jerry Jeudy. But if I was faced with that decision, I'm drafting Jerry Jeudy. So in other words, I'm not taking the rankings, the draft board, literally. I have people who will literally go out and draft whoever is the top guy. You do need some flexibility. I preach flexibility in terms of not locking yourself into positions. Like, in other words, I'm going to draft a wide receiver in round 2. Well, what if a better running back is there? I was faced with that last night. I had our staff league draft, and at the FTN staff league draft, and I was in the middle of the third round, and Najee Harris was still on the board. Okay, well, I got him. Now, it was a super flex, but still, I've been in super flexes where he's gone before that point. So I got him. It was better than the receivers on the board for me at that point, so I went after him. You have to be more flexible. But taking the rankings, taking the draft board literally doesn't help you. I've said this over and over to people on Twitter, in our Discord chat. Just because a player is ranked in a spot does not mean you have to draft that player. I actually said this on the podcast yesterday about Sony Michel and Darrell Henderson. Just because they're ranked in a certain range doesn't mean you have to draft those guys. You can draft other players because the numbers make it look concrete, but it's not concrete. The numbers, this guy's ranked at 56, this guy's ranked at 62. Well, what if there's actually no difference between those guys other than maybe their ceiling and floor or their outlook or the offense they play on or the game scripts they're going to see? But really, overall, the average for those guys is pretty much the same. Now we have to use those little aspects that we know about the player to dictate our decision, or we have to use our roster composition to dictate our decision. Don't take the draft board 100% literally, or you're going to make mistakes. That's the key here. Just because a player is ranked, and I keep saying that about quarterback, well, people say, well, you have, Dak Prescott ranked at 48 or whatever he's ranked right now. Don't quote me literally on that. I don't have the rankings right in front of me. I'm looking at my 2-quarterback draft board, which is different. So, whatever. You have him at 48. Why aren't you taking him there? Well, I'm not taking the top 8 quarterbacks unless I get 2 rounds of value, because I know I can make up ground later at the position, but I can't make up ground later at wide receiver or running back. So I'm much more inclined to go after those 2 positions. That's the thought process behind it. So taking the draft board too literally is problem number 1. On top of that, now I group the players off by the top 60 who are, typically that's your best options for your given league. And then I go round by round. So 60 players get you 5 rounds worth of value. People have said to me, well, why is there 13 players in this one and then 11 in the other round and then only 10 in another? It's because of the value comparison across the players. So sometimes I'll have 2 players who are basically equal value, so they'll be on the same level. Other times I don't. So we don't need 12 players in every round. It's not saying, hey, this guy is who you draft in round 6. It's saying relative to other players, I have a round 6 grade on this guy. Heck, if I have a round 6 grade on him, doesn't mean I want to draft him in round 6. I really, me, I want to draft that dude in like round 9 if I have a round 6 grade on him. But it is a relative thing. It's a way of visualizing the players against each other so that you could use it for any format. So don't take your draft boards literally. Seriously, don't take your draft boards literally. The other thing that I am noticing, and it is widespread, every time I see people saying, hey, what do you think of this lineup? There's one issue I keep seeing. Teams do not have enough firepower up front at wide receiver. So make sure you're going after wide receiver. Try and you can get legit 2 top 10s, but get a top 10. And in order to do that, that means that A, you're probably not taking a tight end in the first 3 rounds. B, you're not taking not taking any more than 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds. And C, you really do need to wait a quarterback. I know you love to have Kyler Murray or Josh Allen or whoever, but you can get away, especially in a 1-quarterback league, with waiting. Invariably, that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing teams that have okay guys at wide receiver, but maybe only 1 top 20. That team to me is too thin. I would much rather be thin at my second running back spot and attack the wide receiver spot than the other way around. So really use the board to your advantage, be flexible there, and don't leave yourself too thin at wide receiver. It's really, those 2 are 2 of the biggest mistakes that I'm seeing people make right now. And that, the lack of flexibility and certainly the lack of depth at wide receiver, high-end talent at wide receiver, it's going to come back to haunt you very likely as we get into the season. So make sure you're being aggressive there at the position. If you want to check out the draft board, like I said, you can head on over to ftnfantasy.com, and all you have to do is use that promo code RATPACK and get yourself a discount, and we keep updating it. I just updated. I've had to update it like 4 times this week already, the cheat sheets. So they'll be set up for you for your drafts this weekend. One more pod this week before National Fantasy Football Draft Day. Of course, that'll be tomorrow. In the meantime, at Jeff Ratcliffe on Twitter, at Jeff Ratcliffe on Instagram. And yes, you can slide into those DMs on Instagram. All right, I'll catch you on the flip side for another edition of the pod. I'm Jeff Ratcliffe, and I'm out.